special request for some information on MS4s. Communities who are not currently permitted, we're asking what would trigger them into an MS4 permit. Right now, Casper and Cheyenne are in because of their size. There are census-defined urbanized boundaries, and the way the EPA does it, or the census does it, it's a census, an urbanized area is a blob of population that meets a certain density requirement and has a population of 50,000 and above. So you have to have both of those things. So Cheyenne and Casper both met those areas, or those criteria. How we could get additional communities in, what we were required to do when these regs first came out in '03 is we had to look at what I call the Tier 2 cities, the cities between 10,000 and 50,000 in population, like Laramie, Rock Springs, Evanston, Sheridan, and Gillette. I think that's all of them. What we did in '03 is we looked at the water quality data that we had. Could we demonstrate that there was an impact from the city's stormwater onto a receiving water? Like, is Gillette's stormwater impacting Donkey Creek, or is Sheridan's stormwater impacting Goose Creek? At that time, there was no evidence either way. We just did not have the data. And so we decided not to permit anyone else. Most other states went the other way. They said, if you're over 10,000, you need a permit. So we have not done that. What will trigger these smaller communities into the program possibly in the future is if you have a high rate of growth, and I think we have 10% per year, or 10% per something in the regulations. If you have a demonstrated impact to surface water quality from your stormwater. There's a couple of other things that I can't remember. One other thing is we can actually go below 10,000 in population for communities that have a very high seasonal population, something like a Jackson. If you have the stormwater and city infrastructure that actually serves much more than your population, even though they're not permanent residents, and we're having or seeing some kind of impact to surface waters, that could trigger a city into the permitting process.
What about Class 1 streams?
Class 1 streams, which are the highest protected waters in the state, are not by themselves a trigger into an MS4 permit. The Class 1 streams we have typically are in very rural areas. Saratoga is probably the biggest town that's on a Class 1 water. And they're very small. Right now there's no plans to include them. Are there any questions on that? All right, let's do transfers and terminations. How the heck do you get out of a permit? All right, you can transfer a permit to somebody else. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the company or the individual who has day-to-day control and supervision of that construction site is what we call the operator. So a lot of times you'll have, especially for road projects, you'll have, YDOT will hire a contractor, they'll come out and do the road project, they build the new road, they've disturbed all the ground on either side of the road, they seed the road, and then the contractor pulls out long before that seed becomes vegetation. So that site is not finally stabilized. So it still needs permit coverage, but the contractor is out of the picture. He no longer has day-to-day control and supervision of that site. So that contractor needs to transfer the permit to whomever does have control and supervision. Same if you build a hotel and you're not landscaping at all. The contractor who built it is going to transfer the permit to the hotel operator or manager or owner if not everything is revegetated by the time they're done. So when operators change, we're going to transfer that permit to the new operator. Also, when a lot is sold to a builder, you've already got the disturbance out there, it's not stabilized, you're transferring a lot or lots to a new builder, then you're going to transfer that bit of your permit to the new builder. Hopefully, we'll have a partial transfer form shortly. Right now, the way we work it is the builder takes, or the developer takes that lot out of his SWIP, the builder submits a new NOI. But that new NOI doesn't usually ever show up. And so we're trying to get to the point where we have more of a chain of custody, where the developer will actually fill out a form, present it to the builder, and then the builder will complete the form and send it to us, and we'll issue a new permit based on that. Also, when you buy another company or you change your company name, so if Knife River buys Simon Contractors, and they buy all those construction sites and those gravel mines and the cement plant, you'll need to transfer the original permits to the new owner. So there are a lot of reasons you would need to transfer. You must transfer the permit within 14 days of the change of ownership. Doesn't always happen. We don't usually get too worked up about it unless it's really late. But 14 days before or after the actual change in ownership is when we want to see that notice of transfer and acceptance, or NOTA, come into our office. The first owner is responsible for that permit until we get the paperwork to transfer it, even if you're no longer on site. So, because we're government, we have a form for this, the NOTA, Notice of Transfer and Acceptance. This is a two-part form. There's a front page and a back page, though we're going to be revising it here pretty quick. The new permittee fills out the front page and signs it, the guy taking on the property. The relinquishing party fills out and signs the back page. Once both halves of that form are sent in or completed, mail it to us. We will process that. We'll issue a new letter of authorization to the new owner with a cover letter explaining that the old owner is no longer responsible. And the previous owner gets a copy of that cover letter. So both parties get written notification of that transfer. And that's really, really important, because what happens a lot of times is we have someone who fills out their part, they give it to the other party, and it falls through the cracks somewhere, and we never get the form. 6 months later, or a year later, or 2 years later, we get a call. Well, how can we get a bill for the permit fee? We're not the permittee. Yeah, you are. So if you do not see confirming correspondence within 30 days of sending that form off to the other party, call us, because something happened and we didn't get the paperwork. And transfer doesn't happen until we get the paperwork. So you guys really need to follow up on that and not find out 2 years later that you've actually been the permittee all along. When you do make the transfer, you need to have the SWIP up to date to whatever conditions you had when you made the transfer, wherever the BMPs are, anything. Hand that up-to-date SWIP to the new permittee, along with copies of the last 12 months of your inspections. The reason we ask for that is twofold, so that the new permittee can kind of skim through those and see where the problem areas have been and keep an eye on those. And so the inspectors can have a little bit of a history to make sure that they kind of know what happened in the last few months to lead to maybe a problem that we got a complaint on. Once you've taken over that permit, you have 30 days to update the SWIP. At the very least, you'll need to update the personnel, the SWIP administrator, because it'll be a new person in most cases. If you are changing the best management practices or changing the construction that will be done, you'll need to update more of the SWIP. But at the very minimum, you'll need to update the personnel. Okay, again, we are working on partial transfers. This permit's now almost 4 years old, and I said 4 years ago we were gonna have a partial transfer form. Not too many people have asked for it, and we got enough on our plate that we just haven't built that form. But John is working on it now. I think he has a draft ready for me, but he's in Hawaii this week. Well, I'm here in Casper in the snow. Seriously. But we hope to have that done here pretty quick, especially important for subdivisions where you're transferring parts and pieces of your project. All right. So that's transfers. Any questions on transfers? All right, yeah, there's one.
Question. Say you're working on a whiteout project, and while it's an active construction site, you have a bunch of walls instead of fence up. You get it seeded, you pull all your BMPs, but you still have to transfer the application or the permit to the whiteout. Do they still need all your inspection reports, even though it's all your BMPs are gone?
If they're going to take the permit on, and they're going to be the permittee, yes. If it's really done and it's vegetated, you can just go ahead and terminate it. Anything else? All right, terminations. How the heck do you really get out of this thing? When the site is finally stabilized, you can terminate your permit. You can get rid of it. What does finally stabilized mean? It means it's either paved over or it's revegetated and you've seeded down and you've built up or grown up a canopy of vegetation. And when I say we're going to talk about 100% vegetated canopy, you're going to stand there and look down, you see no dirt at 100% vegetated canopy. If you have a 50% vegetated canopy, you look down at your feet, about half of the ground is covered with leaf material, whether grasses or forbs. The other half is dirt. So this is where, as Andrea said, you need to know how much veg you had and about what kind of veg you had to begin with, or what's typical for that area. Your final stabilization is to uniformly across that area have a veg cover that is 70% of what that typical background is. Not 70% of 100% and 30% nothing. But say if you have a 50% veg cover before you start, you're shooting for 70% of that, you'll have a 35% veg cover when you're done. And again, it needs to be uniform, not big bare patches here and there. He did have a guy call me one time, he's doing a pipeline, and he said, do I really need to save the topsoil? And I said, how long do you want to keep your permit? Keep the topsoil on top because it makes a huge difference in your revegetation. You will wait a long time. You wait a long time anyway in Wyoming. But if you lose your topsoil, you will wait even longer. The other time you can terminate a permit, and I said this a little bit earlier, is when you sell a built home to a homeowner who is going to move in and live in that house. Even if you have not revegetated the lawn. We prefer that you landscape the lawn or make provision for the roof runoff to get off of their site without eroding their front yard into the street. Either run the downspout onto the driveway or all the way out to the curb so it's not cutting into the topsoil on the lawn. The homeowner can pull that up later when they actually get their yard landscaped. But when your site reaches this wonderful condition of final stabilization, submit a notice of termination. Now you can wait until the permit expires. They expire every 5 years at the latest, oftentimes earlier. But the problem with not submitting a notice of termination is that you're responsible for meeting those permit conditions until you're no longer covered by the permit. So you may have built a hotel and landscaped it and walked away and not bothered to terminate your permit, but you still have to do monthly inspections until that thing is actually off the books. Now, if you paid for 5 years of a permit, $500, and you got the project done in 2 years, we don't give you a refund. So kind of judge how long it's going to take you to re-veg. You can certainly renew a shorter expiration date, but don't keep it running months or years after you're done with the project. We do, again, as with the notices of transfer, we send confirming correspondence. So if you send us a notice of termination, and the notice of termination actually requires you to certify, I certify under penalty of really awful things happening, that this site is finally stabilized. And so if we go out there because we get a complaint, and we just happen to live in that town and know that the site is not stabilized, that's a violation. And that's the reason that we now spot check notices of termination when they come in, especially if they're suspiciously soon. Like it's a highway project and it was started 3 months ago. It's probably not finally stabilized in just 3 months in Wyoming. It takes longer than that unless you have like the most perfect growing conditions ever. So we don't go check them all, but I send a list out to the inspectors every month, and they will go and spot check. And if we find that a site has been seeded, and the reason we were doing this is because some contractors were equating seeding with final stabilization. And they do not equate. We need that veg to come up. So if I do get a report from the field that, wait a minute, this is not finally stabilized, then we will write you a letter back and say you declined to accept your NOT and you were still covered by your permit. Again, we do send confirming correspondence. So if you don't get confirming correspondence, in this case within 60 days, because we have that spot check period, we didn't get it. Follow up with us. All right, questions?
Is there a form we use or just write you a letter?
Oh, good point. Notice of termination is the form we use. We have a form for everything. You know that. We don't have those they are online, but they're not fillable online. And it's our goal within the next few months to have the notice of transfer and acceptance and the notice of termination fillable online. So you can fill them out, print them, sign them, and mail in. We do need original signatures for everything right now. We are working on an online NOI. We don't have NOTA or NOTs on that system yet. Within the next month or two, you may be able to actually submit an application online.
Brings us the second question. When you fill out your forms, you can't save them to your computer. So
When we get the electronic NOI, you will be able to, but we won't be adding the NOT and the NOTA until phase 2.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
When is phase 2?
What's that?
When is phase 2?
I have no idea. Computer stuff just kind of happens around me, and they just kind of tell me.